I had a conversation with a friend a number of years ago who said something that has really stuck with me, which is that the physical artifacts that we think of as art, the paintings, the sculptures, those aren't the art. Those are the evidence that art happened. Those are what's left over after art happens. I think that that's very profound and very important to keep in mind here, that we're talking about art broadly, not as a limited thing, oh, I have to be painting or I have to be sculpting, but as a way of accessing other aspects of the self. I have a list of sort of design principles that I come up with Turn Your Life into Art. Most of them are intended for the creation of sort of, art and magic and ritual, but they could also be used on a daily basis for this. And the first of these principles is that you need to give up control at some level. You cannot control everything. In the book, I call this making infinite gardens instead of finite robots. The point is that you are creating the conditions under which something interesting can happen and then letting go of control. You're not managing it so that this is going to happen now, and that's going to be followed by this and followed by this. The minute you have that kind of blueprint for what's going to happen, or let's say your day, you're cutting off your access to lightning striking, to miracles happening, to butterflies landing on your fingertip. You want to create the conditions under which interesting things can happen and then let go and see what happens. Talking to strangers would be an example. Better yet, going to a cafe and putting up a sign on your table saying, I'll buy you a coffee in exchange for your life story. See what happens. Create the conditions under which something interesting and unexpected can happen and then see what happens. That's one way in which you can do that. It can be as simple as going to a part of the place where you live that you have never been before. It can be doing that at a time where you would otherwise never be there. But set the conditions, see what's interesting that could happen, and then go from there. Another principle is that this works best when it's non-fiction. That is to say, do it for real. Don't pretend to be a rock star serenading people. Actually go busk in the park and sing to people. Make it nonfiction. In one of the examples I gave before, when people summoned me at that event in the park, they really did it. It wasn't a pretend thing. They really did it. When I, had that art experience where I was painted with the images of my unconscious, there was no holding back. Everything we said that was going to happen literally happened. So put yourself in positions where things are really happening as opposed to talking about them, as opposed to pretending, as opposed to make believe. You want this to be real. Another is a concept called engineering disperfection, and put simply, what that means is put yourself in positions where there isn't an optimizable way out, where there's not a clear way that, oh, this is the best outcome, this is the best way things could go, where there isn't an easy right answer, and you just have to make the choice of what you're going to have. The more optimizable it is, the less likely it is going to feel psychomagical. The less likely these kinds of experiences are going to have. You are looking for not no-win situations in the negative sense, but situations where there isn't an obvious way to win. This is sort of applied existentialism in the Burning Man context. If you can't win, if you can't just get more money or climb the ladder, what do you want to do? That's engineered disperfection. If there's no obvious out of this situation, what do you want to do? What feels right? Well, that will help get you in touch with the aspect of psychomagic. And another is, and this is so important, encourage meaningful choices. You want there to be things that are at stake that you're making meaningful choices about. Don't just go through the day, again, going through the motions. Find something that matters to you and make a decision and see where that takes you. It's the difference between changing your window drapes and actually moving to a new place for a while. You're changing your situation in both of those contexts, but one is actually meaningful and the other is a trivial thing. We've talked about orienting towards the not benign. Engaging in acts of art and ritual and play is another aspect. I call those the holy trinity of psychomagical design. If you want your life to be more like art, spend more time around art. If you want your life to be more magical, engage in ritual acts. If you want your life to seem more playful, engage in acts of play. What's best is that over time these things combine. Art becomes ritual, ritual becomes play, play becomes art. Leave yourself open to these kinds of experiences, and the more you do them, the more you'll start to find that you're having these moments and you're having these connections. One of the other ones we'll talk about here is that honesty is the best policy. When in doubt, be more honest. When in doubt, be more vulnerable. That always creates the conditions of non-benign psychological risk that open you up to these kinds of experiences. So there are other design principles as well. Like I said, those are more intended towards creating deliberate experiences, ritual acts, art magic. But on a sort of day-to-day basis, they absolutely apply as well. Back to that sense of psychological risk. If there's something that you really want to say and you feel like, I couldn't possibly, maybe that's something that you need to say. If it's not a, terrible self-destructive decision, if it just feels scary, that's something to do. But also find ways to do it in the most interesting way possible. Don't just blurt it out, although if it's blurted out or nothing, then great. Still do that. But could you get a group of people together and form a circle and tell them? Could you write it down and have other people each read a sentence from that? There are all kinds of ways of doing these ordinary things and just finding ways to make it more interesting. And when you start to bring these different principles together, create no-win situations, engineer disperfection, make meaningful choices, open yourself up to a situation that you're setting the table for, but then don't control the outcome of. If you start to combine these, things get very interesting indeed very, very quickly.